for those of you who have been with us on prior webinars. And for those of you who are new, give you a little bit of background. We hold an annual conference of our management team every year where we get together our MDs and above from around the globe, and we do a variety of things, work on the business. And one of the things we do is have a few roundtables about thinking about business owners, particularly owner-operators. And out of this year's series of roundtables, we came up with a few topics that we thought would be of general interest to prospective business sellers like this. And we decided to make each one of these into an educational webinar, where the focus today, as with prior webinars, will be on education as opposed to marketing. And so we're glad that you're here with us today. I'm coming to you from our U.S. corporate headquarters in sunny and at the same time wet Tampa, Florida, where it's hot and humid as it has been for the last several months. I have a few more people joining us, I see, as we get warmed up here. So I'll go through a few technical things before we jump into our points. You'll see an orange arrow in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And if you click on that arrow, you'll get access to a couple things. The most interesting is a text box down near the bottom. And that text box is where you can put in your questions and comments. I have Sam with me here to my right today, who will be taking in those questions and organizing them. As we go through our points today, I'll leave about 10 minutes at the end to do some question and answer. But don't wait until that time. Go ahead and send the questions in as soon as you get them. If we cover a topic you've asked about, then Sam will filter the question out. And if not, he'll have them all queued up. But we don't need just kind of scrambling around at the end trying to get your question in. We want to make sure we answer all those questions. And then above that, you'll see 4 PDFs. Those are documents that we've created for the webinar series. They're not specifically tied to today's topic, so you don't need to download those and have those open while we're going through the webinar, but they are available for you. They're on some more general topics. Those are available for you to download at any time during the presentation and take a look at later on. Some of them are purely educational. Some of them are a little more marketing materials. If you want to learn a bit more about how to provide our service. All right, so what we're going to do, as we always try to do with this, is, because we're providing you information which you're probably going to want to use sometime down the road, so we try to distill it down to kind of a short laundry list of kind of headlines to remember. Today we're going to have 5, so I'll spend about 10 minutes on each of those 5, and then we'll get into, as I said, the question and answer, and we'll wrap this thing up within an hour. So let's go ahead and jump into the first of our 5 benefits. And again, the benefits we're talking about today have to do with, beginning the company sale process and running through it and having it not end up in a sale. So we think that a lot of business owners may look at that as a kind of 100% victory, 0% defeat type of view, but it's not really, because what we want to show you today are the 5 biggest benefits that you get by starting the process, even if it doesn't result in an immediate sale. So we think this would help you in 2 ways. One, when you go through the process at some point in time, if you can recall these 5 points, it would be useful if you kind of keep a notepad on the side of your desk and you make sure that you're focusing on deriving these benefits in case the process doesn't yield the desired result. And then also we believe that in making your decisions before you go to market, trying to decide what you plan to do with the market, if you're going to go to market, when you would go to market, we think that we want you to have the clearest possible picture of what that's like and what benefits you might get out of that, even if a sale doesn't result. So we think it will help you make a more informed decision about if and when to go to market. So even before you go to market, this list of 5 benefits is probably something that you'll want to file away and refer back to. So we jump into the number 1 benefit, and that's that you will learn a significant amount about your business by going through this process. I can't tell you the number of times I've had a client come back after a sale and tell me something along the lines of, I wish I knew as much about my business when I owned it as I do now. One of the UK directors, who is an MD at the conference, said that he often hears that from his former clients that the company sale process was like the university degree I never got. Well, if you sell the business, those are nice things to say, but there's really not tremendous value in the education. But again, what we're talking about today is if you were to go through the process and not have an immediate exit. So I think it becomes evident how valuable that education will be and how it's a pretty good return on your investment dollars for the cost of going to market. But what actually makes it so educational, right? I want to kind of substantiate this benefit here a bit. I think the best way to do that is to break it down into the different ways that you will be learning about your business to help you really understand what we're talking about here. And there's three primary sources that you will learn from when going through the company sale process. And the first is the broker, and I bring this one up first because chronologically within the process, the broker is the one that will be teaching you about the business at the earliest stages. So the first thing that the broker will teach you is how your business looks to outsiders. And while he'll be talking about outsiders in the context of buyers, a lot of what the broker's talking about is also how you'd be seen by customers, employees, and even suppliers. So again, if you hold on to the business, you've gained some insight there. So to start off with a very easy example of what I'm talking about here, most lower middle market businesses have a website, and the websites are pretty important to the company. But a surprising number of these companies have websites that are either incomplete, out of date, or even at times accidentally deceptive. Websites tend to be something that an owner creates or has created for them, and then they forget about it. But the business keeps on going. The business changes. The business grows. The business evolves. And some of the things that we've seen, to give some simple examples, we've seen inaccurate office locations, offices that have closed, or failure to list some offices that have opened. We've even seen bios of employees that have quit and gone on to work for competitors. We've seen information about regulations that have since been amended or superseded. But the thing I think we see most often is wording that the owner probably thought would be interpreted a certain way actually comes across differently to someone who's giving the business a fresh look. So websites, really simple example. I'll give another example. It's a little more complex, probably equally important. And this is this one is kind of the way I'm going to speak about it is very specific to the United States. I know we have several foreign viewers with us today. So I welcome you all, and I'm sure by the time I get to the end of this example, you'll have an understanding for what I'm talking about, even though some of the words are kind of American in their nature. But so for those of you in the U.S., when's the last time you took a look at your state's UCC filings on your business? Those are public record. Anybody can see them. In a few states, you have to pay a small amount of money to see them, but in most states, it's free for anyone anytime to go on there and look at. And a good broker will be on this issue the first week that they're engaged. It'll be one of the first things they do. They'll go out and they'll pull all of the lien filings against your business that are public record, and they'll come back to you and they'll tie those back down with you to specific debts on the books. And what owners often find during that process is that there are many filings which either relate to loans which were paid off in the past, even the distant past, and at times they'll also find liens that have nothing to do with their business. Perhaps they relate to loans that were taken by a business with a similar name, or they related to some type of business transaction that wasn't really a loan, and therefore there should not have been a lien filing made. In the United States, in a business-to-business context, where the creditor and the debtor are both businesses, the creditor doesn't have an obligation to remove those old lien filings unless they receive a written request from the debtor or the former debtor. And even then, they have 30 days to take care of that. And making it even worse is when someone wants to file a lien against your business, there are really no safeguards. If they fill the form out correctly and pay the $12 or whatever the state charges, the state just takes it in and files it, makes it public. They don't call you and ask your permission to have a lien filed placed against your business. So again, it's not catastrophic that these odd filings are out there. But I think you can see how they create an improper public image of your company, and that's something that most of clients that we deal with, have never really had the time or taken interest to go out and clean up until they get involved in the process and they learn, surprisingly, that these bad filings and erroneous filings are out there on them. So a good broker will also come in and they'll look through your books. They'll climb through them with a fine tooth comb. So, unless you're audited or you have your books reviewed every year by a CPA, there's a good chance that a broker, if they're worth their salt, will find at least 2 or 3 things in your financial records that you'd be interested to know and probably didn't know. Last year we had a client, and our engagement process with that client revealed that the CFO had helped himself to an extra $400,000 of the company's money through an odd array of small and medium-sized transactions. And the client had no knowledge of this until the business sale process started. And this was a client, by the way, that actually had audited financials. And still the CFO was able to get away with that kind of activity. So typically the items that the broker will teach you about are not that grandiose or dramatic. A more common type of finding would be something along the lines of, say, we had this happened actually this year. A client had a nice growing revenue, but their margins were shrinking, and they really didn't have the ability to figure out on their own why that was happening. And we got in there and crawled through the financial records, and what we found is that they had several lines of business, and the fastest growing line of business was also the lowest margin business. A relatively simple observation, but the client just didn't know how to get in there and look at that, and didn't have the people, involved in the everyday running of the company to get in there and look at that for him and explain to him what was going on there. So, think about your business kind of like a car, and you go and you take it and you give it its tune-up every once in a while. And so that broker climbing through there is kind of like tuning up your car a bit. So I think probably the way that the broker can most educate the business owner is just the broader way in which the broker looks at the business, right? So the broker's engaged to come up with a marketing strategy for the business. The two most essential elements of developing that marketing strategy, is to identify the strengths of the business, what the broker would call the key selling points of the business, and then also the items which will unfortunately need to be disclosed to the potential buyers, and which you're going to think of a strategy for how you best disclose those so they don't get blown out of proportion by a buyer, and what you might call the weaknesses or the threats to the business. So what the broker's doing is really a SWOT analysis. Whether they call it a SWOT analysis or not, that's part of what you get first by the broker and then eventually by the buyers once you get out on the market. So there's 3 or 4 reasons why the broker, who's not a teacher, not a consultant, but he actually can't avoid serving in some capacity as both a teacher and a consultant. And this is going to typically be someone who's crawled in and out of 20 or so businesses every year since they went into the profession. And they're also someone who's got a vested interest in getting it right. Yes, if you go out and hire a consultant to groom the business, they can come in and give you whatever advice they want. They're typically going to get paid the same thing. A broker, however, has their bottom line on the table as well, right? Because they want to make sure that the chance of a successful exit is maximized. So they're going to dig really deep, really hard, and give you the straight scoop. No doubt about it. So they have the experience, they have the incentive, they're a great person to be doing that for you. And I actually wish that a lot more of my business school professors had their incentives such a line when I was in school. Would have learned a lot more at an earlier age than I had to learn once I got to work. So the second source of the education is the buyers themselves, right? So once you go to market, the buyers show up, and they'll read the marketing materials, and they'll come back and they'll have questions. And so the questions in and of themselves are great lessons for the owner. The first round of questions that each potential buyer throws out is probably what they view as the most important aspects of the business. So even if the subject matter of the question is addressed fairly well in the marketing materials, they're still going to come back and ask what would they think is most important. So after you talk to 3, 4, 5 buyers and you realize that almost all of them have the same first question, you have to agree that that's probably the most important aspect of determining the value of the business. And even if you don't agree that it's the most important, it's got to be the 3rd or 4th most important element, certainly on the list somewhere. So the questions that I'm talking about can often be in the nature of What happens if your key supplier cuts you off? Or what happens if your key supplier goes bankrupt? Can you pass price increases in your raw materials on to your customers? What's the biggest technological threat to your business, right? So some of them will be questions that you've thought of before, and some of them will be ones you didn't think of before, and some will be ones that you thought of, but you didn't think it was important enough to come up with an answer. But suddenly, after you've been asked it 5 times in your initial meetings, you realize, wow, if I go out of this business, this is something that I'm going to have to address pretty quickly after the sale process winds down. And then think about who these buyers are. Right? I talked a little bit about the experience of the broker and the viewpoint they're coming from, but think about your buyers, right? So as we discussed in the last webinar, there's 2 types of buyers. All buyers are either financial buyers or structural buyers, or strategic buyers. So talk about the strategic buyers first, right? These are the people who are already in your industry, or they're in an adjacent industry. And presumably, because they're the buyer and you're the potential seller, they presumably work at businesses that are bigger than yours. Otherwise, you might be the buyer and they might be the seller. And if you end up holding on to the business, if you don't sell the business, these are people who were probably in your shoes 5, 10 years earlier. The businesses they work in were probably at a stage that your business is presently at. So while they're sitting there talking to you, asking you questions about their business, you also have a chance to get inside their head and ask them some questions about the business and about the industry. So you can learn directly from these more experienced people running larger businesses that have been in your shoes before in a way that you don't often get in other circumstances. And I think one way to look at these strategic buyers, if it wasn't the company sale process, you'd actually call these people mentors. And here you're getting free mentoring. They're showing up and they're offering you advice and pointing you in certain directions, and they don't charge you for it. They don't even necessarily expect anything in return. So those are the strategic buyers, right? Let's flip over and talk about the financial buyers. So these are often people that went to Wharton or London School of Economics. They worked in the world's most prestigious financial centers. After they got their top educations, they probably worked 18 hours a day, 6 days a week for 4 or 5 years. And in all that time, what they were doing? They were analyzing businesses, right? Because that's how you get to be a financial buyer. You get your education, you pay your dues, you learn how to analyze businesses, every type of business, top to bottom, every different way. And so now these people are going to show up and ask you questions about your business. And a little bit of their, great education is hopefully going to rub off on you as you see them. They're asking their questions, and you see how they prioritize stuff. They tend to be really, really sharp people. And they too, like the broker, they have a strong vested interest in getting everything just right and getting to the bottom of every issue. So they're looking at placing a large bet on your company if they buy it. And I said the broker probably looks at 20 businesses or more a year. These people probably look at 5 times that number of businesses every year. So they don't have time to mess around. They're going to come in, they're going to get straight to the point, they're going to ask the tough questions right up front. You try to get someone else to do that in just about any other context, it's hard to imagine somebody being as direct as these buyers will be with you. And if they pass on the opportunity, they'll typically give you a pretty involved reason for why they're passing. If they remain interested and get to the valuation discussions, they will definitely give you lots of details on why their view of the valuation caps out at certain points. In other words, the weaknesses and the threats that they see in your business, right? And all of these things are lessons. And so I think finally on this point, although I've probably been on the buyers a little too long here, when you get to the due diligence stage, the buyers turn the process over to their experts, right? So now you're going to get lawyers from major law firms coming and asking questions about the business, looking over your documents. You're going to get accountants from national and global accounting firms doing it. You're going to get specialists in HR, benefits, real estate, IT, maybe even environmental, depending on your industry, coming in and looking at your business. They're going to be giving opinions. You don't have enough insurance. You have too much insurance. your employee manual is out of date. You talk about getting a tune-up for your business. I tell you what, when you've been through diligence, the business is certainly knows what it needs to go into the shop for if a deal doesn't get done. So, all right, let's move on from the buyers and their specialists. We talk about the third and final source here, and that's yourself. And this is probably where all those other things are nice to know about the business, but you will teach yourself a tremendous amount about the business. It's a very emotional process. I didn't get married until I was 47 years old, and I thought I would know what it was like on the other side of that wall. But then, I've been over here for a couple of years now, and I really had no idea what it looked like, so I went through it. There's no buyer teaching me about it. There's no broker teaching me about it. I think my wife tries to teach me about it, but it doesn't get very far. It's really, the introspection that I spend myself thinking about my relationship, and my marriage. I think that's a very good analogy to the way you feel about the business, having gone through a company sale process. Maybe another example, you think back to that time when your first child went off to college or off to the military, if you're old enough for all that. And it's a process much like that. And so think about what went through your head and how your worldview and your relationship with your children might have changed as a result of going through that process. You get an idea what I'm talking about. There's the parable of the woodcutter that's too busy chopping down trees to spend the time to sharpen the axe. And we have a lot of clients like that. So while they continue to run the business while undertaking the sale process, the process does force them to find a little bit of extra time to sharpen that axe a bit. So, all right, I've gone over my 10 minutes on the learning, so move on to our second benefit, which is true value. So I'm going to spend a little more than 10 minutes on this one also. This is a good one. So the number one question that we get whenever we meet a potential client, and probably the question that's most exciting for all of you, and this is what everyone wants a simple answer to after talking to us for about 2 hours, is, what's my business worth, right? What's my business's value? Can understand why that's an important question. But the best response that can be given to a question about value or worth is that, it's worth what a willing buyer and you are able to agree to an arm's length transaction in the absence of duress, right? That kind of cliche saying, but it's actually true, and it's never truer than when we're talking about a business. So many people will equate a business to real estate, or selling a business to selling real estate, and it really just doesn't work that way. So we all know that the saying also that each piece of real estate is unique. So I was saying about learning the true value of the business. So when you go to business school, you learn 3 different ways to value a business. These are great academic exercises, and all this financial literature, business schools, all very much based on publicly traded companies, and that's not who we're addressing here today. We're addressing owner-operated businesses, privately held businesses, businesses that are much smaller than publicly traded businesses. So I want to kind of walk through, if you've ever asked someone to give you a value for your business, I want to walk through real quickly the 3 different techniques that they would have learned in school and employed some or all of. And I wanted to give you just a quick perspective on the weaknesses those have when it comes to valuing your particular business. So the most technical version you see on the screen there now, the discounted cash flow analysis, or the DCF, is that's one that predicts all the future cash flows of the business and then discounts those back to their present value, and it doesn't work. It requires, I'll just tell you 3 of the problems, the biggest problems that we have with that in the lower middle markets. The first thing is that it requires a business to have a consistent history of financial performance. So, businesses that are other than, some of the largest businesses in the world tend to not have this smooth historical performance. They have up and down years, up and down months. They have seasonality. Customers go, products fall out of favor, good salespeople retire, the business bounces back. But that tends to not give a good historical steady period to look at. So that's really the first reason the DCF is tough. Second reason is that the DCF requires a pretty clear picture of how those historical figures can be extrapolated into the future, right? Because it needs to predict the future cash flows, right? Those two words are in the title of the methodology. Um, and no two people are going to come up with ideal matching projections about that cash flow going forward. So the larger the businesses, the closer the agreement might be. But with smaller businesses with an inconsistent past history, the opinions on the future cash flows, the growth rate of the business are going to be all over the place, and there's not going to be any way to get uniform agreement on what those cash flows should look like, or what they probably will look like. And then lastly, those future cash flows, as I said, the first word of this, discounted. They have to be discounted back to present value. And so the buyers that would be valuing the business have to come up with a rate at which to discount those future cash flows. Just in the last month alone, I've met with buyers who have said that they would use an 8% discount, and others that say that they would use a 35% discount rate. So 8% to 35%. Well, if you have $1 that you're going to collect next year, and it's worth either 92 cents today or 65 cents today, how can anyone come up with a meaningful valuation based on a discounted cash flow? And how could multiple people agree using different discount rates what the value of the business is, right? So that lack of consistent long-term performance, the inability to project the future cash flows out accurately, and the different discount rates that each buyer will use mean that anyone who isn't the person showing up with the money, who tries to tell you that you can value your business based on this model, is probably not doing you a favor. It's an estimate at best, and it's only an estimate of what one buyer would pay, not the entire market. So the second technique that's learned is called the comparable transactions method. And unfortunately, it's equally flawed when dealing with companies in the lower middle markets. Even if you overlook the fact that each business is unique, as we discussed a couple slides back, the data just isn't good enough. In the United States especially, this is true, because aside from the IRS, our tax authority, who never shares the data, U.S. companies have no obligation to report their deal sizes or their historical EBITDA or profit to anyone. So the best that can be done when you're dealing with non-publicly traded companies is that you can go to these services that purport to collect the data, like PitchBook and Capital IQ, two big examples. And of course, the people in the market belong to those services and pay the fees and can collect the data. But those are all self-reported transactions, and there's that term in IT, like ego, right? Garbage in, garbage out. So the multiples that they purport to show there, it's not clear whether those are based on the trailing 12 months EBITDA of the business, the projected future 12 months of EBITDA of the business, or sometimes if the business doesn't have good monthly financials, the number they may be using may be just last calendar year's EBITDA. So it may be even more out of date. So there's two variables in the multiple. There's the deal size and the financial performance. So the financial performance variable is suspect, and the deal size variable is equally suspect because these deals are typically not 100% cash at close. There can be different elements to the transaction. So how does the person reporting a certain deal value the earnout when they calculate the multiple? Do they take into consideration the cash that the business owner is able to retain? Sometimes owners are able to retain the accounts receivable in the transaction. Did they count those towards the transaction value or not? There's so many variables, and some people have an incentive to report a high multiple, some people have an incentive to report a low multiple, and they have so much discretion in there that they can Mickey Mouse around with those two variables and make it show whatever you want. So comparable transactions, remembering that every business is unique and that the numbers are just self-reported with two weak variables in the equation, just doesn't cut it for getting a true value for the lower middle market business. Then the third and final thing that we learn in school is about comparable prices. So the concept there is, Microsoft trades at 17 times, and therefore, my business should trade at 17 times because I'm just like Microsoft. So again, every business is unique, but taking it a little further here with this model, Microsoft is a publicly traded business, so its shares have liquidity. Your business is not publicly traded, so your shares do not have liquidity. So anyone who's using this comparable price model would apply a liquidity discount to your business. But what's the agreed upon formula for the size of the discount? There is not one. What should the discount be? Ask 3 people, you'll get at least 4 different answers. So that first of the many discounts is anyone's guess. On top of that, there'll be a size discount. So businesses that are larger traded for higher premiums. But again, what's the formula for calculating the size of the discount? Nobody would agree on that second discount. Third discount, smaller businesses tend to have fewer products and services to offer. They play in fewer industries. They have narrower geographic reach, and they'll often rely on 1 or 2 big customers for the lion's share or a big chunk of their revenue. So this requires introduction of a third discount called the concentration discount. So if you want to use a comparable prices model, you have to find a comparable business that's publicly traded, which can be challenging in itself. And then you have to apply these 3 discounts. And minor fluctuations in the amount of any one of these discounts results in tremendous differences in the valuations derived from the process. So just as with the first 2 models, this is not a good tool for determining true value in the lower middle markets. These tools are used, as I said, for publicly traded companies if you're trying to pick a stock portfolio for your clients or trying to pick your own portfolio. They're used because they must be used sometimes for tax valuations or for succession planning or trusts, for divorces. But in terms of true value of the business, they are all very weak approximations. And while they will, you can argue that they might give you a fair value, and that's what the IRS is looking for and what you're looking for in most situations. You as the business owner looking to divest what is potentially your largest single asset, you don't want a fair value, you want to know the true value. So what are you supposed to do if these textbook academic methods don't work? Well, I want to answer that, take a step back to answer that question, because I think that's actually the wrong question. What's my business worth, or what's the value of my business? That's not really what you're interested in. What you want to know is, what price can I get? And price is not the same thing as value or worth. Value and worth are very subjective terms. Price is a number. It's not subjective. So the question you should be asking yourself is, what price can I get? All right, so how do we get to an answer to that question? The way that we think about it here is that you have to ask yourself these 2 questions you see in the middle of this slide. One, what is the business worth to me, or what is the value of the business in my hands? And the second question is, what is my business worth to the best possible acquirer? Or in other words, what value will the best possible acquirer place on my business? And once you have those 2 questions answered, then you know the price range, because the price range will be something between what it's worth to you and what it's worth to them, right? You're not going to sell it for less than it's worth, and they're not going to buy it for more than it's worth to them. This is our price range. Suppose that you value it at £6 sterling, and all the buyers in the market value your business at £5. Well, the price in that circumstance is 0, because there will not be a transaction. You value it more highly than the market. There's no price. I guess it's 0 or null, either one. But let's just flip the example a little bit and suppose that you value it at €5 and you identify a buyer who values it at €6. Okay? Now we know that the price of your business will be in the range of €5 to €6, and to figure out the price, we need to figure out how to get that as close as possible to the buyer's €6 and as far as possible from your €5 valuation. and that's how you set price. So here's a little more visual presentation on this slide, right? So in the top bubble there, the value to you, the owner, is higher than the value to any buyer you can identify. No deal, price equals 0. The bottom is the value to you, the value to the buyer, the price range being the difference between those two. So how do you uncover, or how do you answer those two questions that I had a couple slides back? What's the value to you, the owner? What's the value to the buyer? Well, the value to the buyer you can only determine by going to the market. And you need to go to the market very broadly because, as I've said a few times already here, there's a wide variety of buyers that will offer a wide variety of prices because they will value the business different from one another. So unless you go out and really reach out to those buyers, you're not going to know the highest possible value to the buyer, and you're not going to know the top end of the price range. So as an example, a couple of years ago, we had a client that was an unarmed security guard business, not too far away from us. You know, in the state of Florida here, to have an unarmed security guard company is it's a pretty easy business to start. You must have a box of T-shirts and a $90 permit from the state. You unfortunately don't get long-term clients. The turnover for the employees is pretty high in that industry. And so you don't have a lot of the long-term value drivers that you see in a lot of businesses. It could be a difficult type of business to sell. Because again, we needed to find someone who valued it more highly than the owner. In other words, someone who didn't want to just open up across the street, get their own permit, get their own shirts, and go into business and compete. We found a buyer in Argentina for the transaction. Why did that buyer have a higher value than our client had? Well, the reason was because that buyer had a large business in Argentina and was interested in getting into the United States market. But he just wanted to dip his toe in the water. And this was a relatively small deal. It ended up being around $2 million. And that's a pretty small deal to bring money all the way from Argentina. But for this buyer, this was the buyer who had the highest end on the price range because the value in his hands was far higher than it was to anyone else. And so, our hypothesis here is that unless you go to market and search broadly, you're not going to know the value to buyers. There's no way to know it. The other side of the equation, what's the value to you, the owner? Now, this is something that has to come from you, and this is where we go back and tap on the first couple of benefits from the sale process, which is the education that you'll receive, for example, right? So hopefully, in going through the process, you'll get a better understanding of the value of the business to you if you don't already have that. Let's see, we'll try to speed up here a little bit and get caught up. So that ties out the second benefit. We move on to the third one, and the last three will go a lot faster than the first two. So the third benefit is that the process should help you decide what you're going to do, right? Because you're going to have to do something with your business. You're not going to live forever. The business isn't going to live forever. One way or another, there's going to be a parting of the ways between you and your business. And that may be a sale, or it may not be a sale. And one of the things that's nice about the company sale process is, going back to that real estate thing again, it's not like selling real estate. Typically with real estate, when the broker gets engaged, you, the seller, sign a contract with them that says you will pay them a substantial fee if they're able to produce a ready, willing, and able buyer that will pay the list price. So if you change your mind and decide you want more than the list price and this buyer won't pay it, you may still be stuck with a sizable fee. So in effect, when you're going to market with real estate, your hands are a bit tied, because if the broker delivers but a deal doesn't get closed, you still have to pay the fee. So business brokering should never be like that. It should never be like that in two ways. One is your broker should not be collecting a success fee just for producing a buyer. They should get paid at the closing and only at the closing, not a moment sooner. In other words, when the money's coming to you, some of it gets diverted and goes to them. But if you're not getting any money, they're not getting any money. So our terms of engagement, for example, says right across the top, this agreement does not obligate client to enter into a transaction with any person or entity. Client has the choice to reject any offer presented pursuant to this agreement for any reason or no reason whatsoever. And you're not going to probably find that on a real estate contract. But what this means is you're not making a commitment to sell the business just because you go to market. Yeah, you're learning what options are available to you. You're collecting information. A vastly different situation. This is also why you should not go to market with a list price. So on our teasers, for example, we use the very kind of British English language of bids invited as opposed to a sale price. And this little, maybe it's a little bit of a tangent I've gotten on here, but this might be the most important thing that we've discussed today, and that's, you know, if you do start the process, make sure you start it off on the right footing there. Even if you are 100% sure you're going to be able to sell the business in that process, make sure you're not committing to something too soon with regard to that. But to get back to more a point about these benefits, yeah? So deciding whether to write it out or not. You may learn from the process that the value the market is willing to offer your business is not higher than the value of the business in your hands. Or alternatively, that it's just not high enough to meet all of your future personal needs. Now, of course, you can also find the opposite and get pleasantly surprised, but that's not what we're talking about today. But at some point in time, as I said, we're all going to have to exit our businesses. So, you know, they always say half emerges in divorce, the other half end in whatever. That's kind of the same thing. You either sell your business or it ends the other way. And the question is, do you want to be in control of that, or do you want that to be controlled by forces other than yourself? Yeah. So what we're saying here is that the sale process helps you get a better understanding of what you want to do with the business, and that may end up being a sale or it may not be a sale. So another way to say that is that what it's really helping you do is weigh all the different options that pop up. So if you attended our first seminar about grooming a business, you probably recall that we said that we thought, generally speaking, grooming is not worth the money or the effort that you put into it. Well, but congratulations, you've now found the exception to that belief that we have here. And that's that once you've gone through the sale process, you know, and you don't sell as a result, you'll have an idea of what areas need to be groomed because your broker will have talked to you, your buyers will have talked to you, you will have thought about it, going back to that educational benefit again. So you know, now the grooming might make sense. You know, you're not going to go out, you know, it's like, again, to go back to selling a home, you may think you need to update your floors, your landscaping, your kitchen, and your bathrooms, but once you go in the market and all everyone talks about is, you know, how the bathroom needs to be updated, well, now you know how to focus your money. You're only going to do the bathroom. You're not going to waste money on the kitchen and the carpets and the landscaping. Same type of thing here. So yeah, that's one option that you might learn about or learn to think about from the sale process. Some other ones would include, you know, just growing the business. Yeah. So if you know how much money that you need to meet your personal expectations post ownership of the business, you'll get an idea from going to market what the gap is between the value of your business or the price you could sell it at and what you need to sell it at. And so that will give you an idea of how much to grow, how fast to grow, how long you'll need to grow, and it'll help you map out that eventual exit. Alternatively, you may learn from the process that you don't really see a path to achieving that ideal exit number. So in that case, you can think about recapitalizing the business to build a nice nest egg outside of the business, even if you can't grow the business to the size that you would want it or need it to be. So in other words, you're going to take on debt in the business, and that's going to free up cash flow for you to take out as dividends. Or maybe another option is to just stop investing in the business, let the business kind of run down, and the money you would have invested, stash that away for your personal benefit, and then you know, stop reinvesting in the company's own profits and suck those out and find somewhere you can put that money that will give you a better return, you know, the return that you need to get to meet your life goals. Another option that might become apparent is, you know, succession planning. Is there a family member or some employees who could cover some of your needs, take over the business, and then provide you the cash on an ongoing basis that you need to achieve those personal goals? So, you know, all these different options, and there are more that they could talk about, but I think you'll see how thinking about these other options becomes much more clear if you've gone through the company sale process. All right, speeding up a bit here, moving on to the fourth benefit. Selling takes time. Why does it take time? Well, there's 4 different steps to the process that we'll run through pretty quickly and give you an idea of how long those typically take and why they take that long. Speed up here, try to get caught up. Yeah, so first you have the time to go to market, right? So you decide that you want to go to market. You're going to have to find your broker. You have to get your engagement letter signed. Then you're going to have to build your marketing materials, your marketing strategy. You're going to need these documents to be written, developed. The broker's going to have a lot of questions for you. You may or may not have access to that information yourself personally. You may have to ask some of your employees to provide that information for you. You may not. You may wonder what the employees will think if you ask for it, so you have to dance around. It takes time. These things stretch out. So a good broker, once they're engaged, could theoretically get you on the market in a couple of weeks. But you're running your business. You got to keep hitting your numbers. Selling your business is probably not going to be your full-time job. So the broker usually ends up sitting around waiting for the client to get back with the information and the approvals and the answers to the questions so that they can get the strategy built and the marketing materials written up. How much time does this first step going to market take? Well, let's see, I wrote down some numbers here. I don't want to skip over them because they're going to add up as we go through this. We're going to got that down. I would say 4 to 6 months from the time that you first decide to pick up the phone and call someone to when you can actually go in the market. You should budget in 4 to 6 months. Now, of course, things can go wrong with the business in that time. You might miss some numbers. There may be a bad month that you want to get out of the trailing 12 months. You may have an audit coming up, or your tax returns may be completed soon, so you don't necessarily want to go to market with a published internal number right before you do the taxes, because you might find out your internal number was a little bit off and you don't want to have 2 sets of numbers out there. So there are a number of reasons. Maybe it's a bad time of year. There are certain times in the M&A calendar when you don't want to go on the market. So that is part of that reason. You say 4 to 6 months, but it can stretch out longer. And of course, it can be shorter if you get engaged quickly, get through the process. It can be very short, but you should probably expect 4 to 6 months just to get on market. Then you have your time on the market. Yeah, the teasers go out, the broker follows up, the NDAs, the non-disclosure agreements come in, the information memoranda go out, which is the book that's talking about your business. The broker follows up. The buyers have questions. The broker follows up. Something bad might happen to the business or the customers while you're on the market again. You have to schedule calls with the buyers. Then you have to schedule site visits with the buyers. Data has to get into the online data room. The buyers have to have time to review the online data room. They have questions. They have follow-up documents that they require to be put into the data room. You continually get asked questions. The broker continually follows up. Then eventually the letters of intent start to appear. They have to be compared to each other. They have to be negotiated. Finally, you sign a letter of intent and go off the market. How long have you been on the market? 6 months, a year, maybe. Those are not uncommon ranges. It can be much shorter, but there's no way to tell in advance. And yes, there are ways to shorten the process, but they often result in trade-offs against achieving maximum value and the ideal deal structure. So cumulatively, with these first 2 steps, we're at 12 to 18 months. Then you have the time to get the deal done. Yeah. So you're off the market. Your exclusivity period is laid out in the letter of intent, and we always try to cut these down to 60 days for buyers, but realistically nowadays, the way things are, it's almost impossible to get exclusivity under 90 days, right? So 3 months, you're going to be working on the deal kind of as a minimum. And then if the buyer has to arrange financing, this can take even longer. And as the buyer for your business is likely going to be putting in about half the money in debt, it's a substantial check that they're asking creditors to write. And the creditors usually ask the buyer to pay them an upfront fee. So the buyer wants to be pretty sure the transaction is going to go through before they make that payment to the creditor and bring the creditor in. But then the creditor comes in and does their own diligence and extends it even further. I think, if you've tried to deal with banks, any type of lenders in the last few years, you know that they move at their own pace. The buyer can't control them. The seller can't control them. The seller's broker can't control them. They can stretch it out. We had a client last year. Everything was in place. The agreement was agreed. All the diligence was done, but they needed financing. 13 months. We met with the client and said, look, we can go back to market. We can find another buyer. Well, this buyer had offered an insane price. And for this client, the right option was to wait it out. And we waited for 13 months and the deal closed, and they got a massive premium on the sale of the business. That was the right answer for that client because they could, they didn't mind too much waiting that extra 13 months. Other clients would have said, no, let's try to find someone else or let's go with the second best offer. But my point in that story is, you have to be thinking about flexibility. But, you should be thinking in terms of getting a deal done is about 90 to 150 days. So cumulatively, we're at between 15 and 30 months as a reasonable expectation from the time you pick up the phone to start the process until the time the deal closes. And like I say on the infomercials, but wait, there's more. As I said, there's 4 steps. Very few owner-operated businesses can be sold and have the owner-operated depart immediately at closing. We typically see between 6 months and 2 years is the staying on period. But the less process-driven your business is, the longer you'll need to stay. The more relationships you personally hold, the longer you'll have to stay. The weaker your kind of second-tier management is, the longer you'll have to stay. Some buyers do show up with their own teams to put in place, but that's the exception to the rule. And even those that have them will typically still want a 6-month handover period. A buyer's greatest concern is that they're going to pay you top dollar. They're going to empty their coffers to pay you. They're going to take big debts, which they're going to pay back the interest on out of the proceeds of the business. And then the business takes a stumble right after they take over, and they have to find more money to put into the business. And they view the ability to mitigate that risk is there because they're going to keep you around to keep a steady hand on the tiller for the first, couple of cycles after they take over their ownership. So selling takes time. So this, again, is a benefit. So you can start the process, or you may think, look, I don't want to sell right now. But if you wait until you're ready to sell, and you're looking at this, what do we come to, 15 to 30 months, I think, right? And you're already ready to sell, buyers can smell desperation. They're very good at it. And just like you're trying to find their value to establish the top of the price range, throughout the process, they're trying to find the value in your hands to establish the bottom of the price range. And if they sense that your expiration date has long since passed or you're looking for the quickest possible exit, they're going to take their interpretation of your value of the business is going to drop significantly, and that price range is going to stretch down significantly as well. So it is, again, I talked a little bit a couple slides back about, make sure you enter the process correctly. You need to enter the process with someone who is willing to stick around with you. If you need to if you move to a certain stage and say, look, we've gotten the first half of it out of the way, I'm not ready to go right now, I need to put the process on hold, please make sure you're working with people, lawyers, accountants, brokers, that will agree to that and stick with you, right? So if you go with someone who's very small, that's only doing 2 or 3 deals a year, they're going to get a little panicky, and they're going to try very hard to convince you not to slow down and not to put the process on hold because you're, half or a third of their revenue. And if you go with someone who's too big for you, they're also going to, think, I don't want to hang around with this person and have them on the books and have to kind of hold their hand for a couple of years while they go through this on hold process. So that's an important thing to discuss early on with all the people that you're working with to make sure they'll wait that out with you. All right, benefit number 5, getting near the end here, and I can save a little time by cutting some of this off. Sam, what time are we at?
108.
108. So sorry, we run a little over because of that pause. But this is actually the best one. This is the one I really like. Falling in love with the business again. Right, so in the course of providing us the data, reviewing the key selling points that the broker comes up with, and hearing all the strategies, and then you're rehearsing for the buyer calls, focusing on the good stuff about your business that you want to talk about, and the buyers are going to be really complimentary about your business. What we see from our clients is that they get really pumped up about the business again. So yes, they still want their time back, and they still want liquidity. But they realize that the reason that they've come to market is really not because they hate their business. So what they find out is that what they really hate is the 60 hours a week, the responsibility for hitting payroll, for hitting rent, handling all the HR problems, dealing with the banks, living with personal guarantees. And they actually still love designing widgets or manufacturing widgets or distributing, servicing, selling widgets. They still like that. And what they kind of settle in on is that they want a big chunk of their time back, but they want the ability to focus on what they used to love about the business, the reason they got into it in the first place, while of course also at the same time getting a big check. So they're going to sell the business but not exit the business. And that often comes as a big surprise. And as I discussed earlier, these new options appear. Yeah? So while selling a minority stake in a smaller business is very difficult, we don't see that. It's really a rarity. We do see things from anything from about 51% to 100% on a regular basis. And these would be transactions that are staged, in 2 stages or 3 stages at different times. And we see this on a regular basis. And what this means is that the owner can get the chance to divest the part of the business that he or she has grown weary of and refocus the time now either on their personal family life or the parts of business that they truly enjoy. So we've also seen transactions where the exit is itself a family succession play. So we recently did a 9-figure deal out in the Midwest U.S. in which the mother and the father were jointly the sole shareholder of the business, and they retired, with a 6-month holdover, of course, handover. And their 2 daughters, who'd worked in the business since a very young age, took about a 15% interest in the business. And they took over the 2 key leadership roles within the business. So the children, in this case, and is often the case, they lack the funds to provide the cash necessary for the parent/owners to, exit and retire on. Even if they leverage up the business, that would oftentimes be hard, especially in an asset-light business. So having an outside buyer come in with the equity and then leaving a big chunk of it in the hands of the children as well as the leadership roles is a great form of succession planning. You also have to think about when mom and dad started that business, it was much smaller, and they grew, and their business understanding grew with the business. And so it's a little bit, risky to imagine putting, Junior and Princess into that business to run it when it's already going 100 miles an hour, right? So when they were 16, mom and dad didn't give them keys to Maseratis for their first cars. And similarly, you don't necessarily want to hand over a business that's worth 9 figures to, people in their 20s that haven't really grown up, from the start with the business and been in those managerial roles for a long time. Whereas if you do this and a buyer comes in, they're providing some of that oversight, it's a good way to avoid, the parents and the children being in an odd supervisory relationship, but yet there's still some, senior supervision of the children running the business. So I was going to wrap it up here and talk about the most popular version of this, which is the 80-80 option, but since we're short of time, I'm going to skip out on that, the last 2 slides here. I think this is a good topic. This is a type of transaction that we see happening a lot. And I always like, if you've been on our earlier presentations, I always like to throw a little bit of math and algebra into the presentations. We're not going to have time for it here, but I think we will put this into a future webinar, this 80-80 option, which is it's surprising how often our clients come in saying, I want to sell everything and leave, and they end up saying, no, I want an 80-80 deal. So we'll talk that through, a little bit of a teaser for next time. So that brings us to a slightly belated end to the webinar. And at this point, we will, I appreciate people staying with us over time, and we will stay here and spend about 10 minutes on the questions as well. So Sam, what do we have in the way of questions?
Okay, I did have a few come in throughout the presentation. If you mind, everyone, please send over questions now if you have some. First one came from Kevin. He asked, why would someone start a process and have it not end in a sale?
That's a good one. So we've looked at this before, obviously, and I think there's a number of reasons, and it kind of breaks down. If you want to ascribe percentages to each reason, it really breaks down fairly evenly. So the outside data on the market in general says that 75% of businesses that go to market do not sell. So we see rates higher than that because of the nature of the process that we run here. But we do see transactions that don't close. So the first reason that happens is some people don't get through the process to go to market. They think their business is all peaches and cream, and the broker comes in and starts to look at it and ask some questions, and it becomes evident fairly soon that there's some low-hanging fruit that the client or the seller could fix up, and so they'll stop the process at that point. Other times, something will happen to the client during the course of getting ready to go to market. Tends to usually be a negative thing. We've had clients in Atlanta. We had a client whose office burned to the ground, and their entire business was in that one office, and so they had really nothing left to sell. So that's an extreme example, but things can come along. A big setback that the owner knows. Say you lose half your sales team, the owner knows that's going to affect the valuation, so they want to regroup and put their best foot forward when they actually go live on the market. So a sizable chunk fall out before they go to market. Then in the process of going to market, I alluded to one of the reasons, which is the business is worth more in the hands of the owner than it is to anyone else on the market. And that's probably hard to imagine because most business owners, the asset is their main, the business is their main personal asset. They've put everything they have into the business for decades in many cases. Whereas buyers are sitting out there, they've got tons of money and lots of diversification, so why couldn't they always pay more for the business? And I think a lot of the reasons that processes fall apart in that stage is if the seller is not being taken out to a wide enough group of potential buyers. I mentioned that case about Argentina. That was really thinking outside the box. People wouldn't usually take a $2 million opportunity halfway around the world. But maybe the outreach is too narrow, and we see this a lot. We get a lot of clients who have gone to market in the past and it's failed, where they might have gone with a broker who specializes. We had one that specialized in payment process companies. That seems like a very small market. But what happens is the only buyers that they met were people who were already in the industry, and the nature of their service offering was maybe not better than what was already in the market. So the people in the market said, why would I need to buy you? I'll just slowly take your customers away with a superior product or whole, price cutting or something like that. Whereas if they, when they got with someone who thought outside the box and took them to more than just the 6 or 7 normal buyers in the industry, they were able to find someone who, for some odd reason, place more value on the business than them. So that's probably the second biggest reason. The third reason is that there are times where, regardless of what the business is worth, either to the seller or the buyer, the seller has in their mind that they need a certain amount of money to accomplish their gifting and retirement plans. And they might be at a young stage in life, maybe they're early 50s, and they're thinking, I need income for 40 years, and I have, 6 children and 20 grandchildren that I want to share this with, and some of my key employees deserve a big chunk because they were so loyal, and they've kind of maybe overpromised, either out loud or in their head, they've overpromised the proceeds to a lot of people, and they realize, not enough left to keep me alive for 40 years. So they'll take that business back, run it for another 10 years, wait for the kids and grandchildren to get a little older so they don't need the money as much, let the actuarial tables shorten down their expected retirement period, and then come back to market. But at least then they have a good idea of, how long they need to wait and how they need to kind of rejigger all of their promises to these different people and their plans for how they were going to gift to the other people. So those are all reasons why I think, the owners decide not to follow through with the process. And I would say those are probably the 3 biggest ones right there.
Okay. Very good. Next question comes from Mike. He said, if it does not end in a sale, is business harmed by the employees or customers learning it was for sale?
Yeah, so that can absolutely be a problem. The process, a well-run process prevents that from happening. And if it does somehow happen, if you're working with, good lawyers or brokers that have been in the business for a while, they're going to know how to handle that and help you deal with that if it happens. But the vast majority of transactions, whether they close or not, the employees and customers do not find out about it. We sold a business over in Orlando 2 years ago, and we must have gone all in one location, 100 employees. We must have gone in and out of there 60 times over the course of that engagement. And the day the business sold, there were only 4 people who knew about the sale, and those were the owners and the CFO who had been brought into the process. We thought for sure the receptionist must have known something was up, but she said honestly to the CEO that she never thought twice about it. So the process can be structured correctly around that, and if it does leak out, there's a lot of ways to deal with that. We just had a client in yesterday that said that they were worried that their biggest customer might know about it because they got an odd call, and so we kind of spent some time walking through with them. All right, here's you kind of let it go, and if it pops up again, here's some strategies for dealing with it. So you should be prepared for it, and you should run a good process to minimize the chance that it happens. But the reality is, as I said earlier, we all exit our businesses at one point or another. And so if you have to sit down and have a serious talk with someone, you say, did you think I was going to own this business for 200 years? I mean, look at how old I am, or look at my lifestyle, or what's going on with my family. I was going to have to exit the business at some point in time. So I'm trying to do it in an orderly fashion that ensures the continuity of the business, the ability to continue supplying customers and keep everyone happy. And I'm looking for the right type of buyer, and it's a slow, methodical process. And I bet you're happy to know that I'm doing a slow, methodical process as opposed to that I woke up one morning and decided I was sick of the business and put a sign in the front yard. Yeah. And so if you get these customers or employees who are comfortable with the process and explain to them that it's the Hakuna Matata, it's the circle of life, the problems go away.
Very good. Okay, last question I have for at the moment is from Carson. He asks, what percentages of businesses that start the sales process actually sell?
Oh, yeah. Well, I kind of jumped on that one already. So the industry data, remember, it's all self-reported, is that 75% of businesses that go to market don't sell. Now that includes businesses that don't have proper representation, but the numbers go way higher. We see numbers that are significantly higher than that when the key component, I'll mention 3 components to get that number higher. The key component is that the seller's committed to the process. Yeah? And that doesn't mean they're committed to sell at any price. It means that they're committed to go through the exploratory process and answer the questions and take the meetings and provide the data that's required to go through. Because if they're, if buyers start to hone in on a particular issue and the seller just says, I'm not going to share that information, I'm not going to give an answer to that, well, that's going to lower the percentages. So a committed, motivated seller is the number one thing to make that number irrelevant. The second most important thing, I think, is that the seller has the proper deal team around them, that they have an M&A attorney that knows about the tax issues related to M&A, that they have good accounting because the numbers are going to be questioned up, down, and sideways, that they have a good broker so that they make sure that they're getting out to the greatest number of people, and also because the broker's job is to kind of, near the end of the deal, represent the deal, because the buyer and the seller want the deal to happen, so the honest broker kind of is a little bit in the middle trying to hold the deal together, and without that glue, the deals can evaporate needlessly. So having the right deal team of professionals around is the second thing. And I think what I'm getting at is that taking that number of 75% of businesses in the lower middle markets don't sell is irrelevant, because you're not selling an infinite number of businesses, you're selling one business. And so there are no statistics on when you have a committed seller with the right team of professionals around them. There's no statistics on that. The deals we see that don't go through, they don't go through because there's not a committed seller, or the seller doesn't have the right advisors around them. And then I guess the third caveat being, the seller maybe does have good advisors and they're motivated, and one of their advisors, I forgot to mention, is the wealth manager, right? So the wealth manager says, hey, if your whole life you've derived your primary income, or your whole adult life, off of this one asset, this business, and you pull your cash out of that, and now you're entering a new phase of your life with the sale of your business, and you're going to have different sources of income, and these are probably very foreign to you. So a good wealth manager can come in and explain what that next step of your life looks like. We have clients that often say, I need this much money because I'm only, what can I get at a bank? 1% on my money? If you have $20 million, you're going to get a lot more than 1%, particularly if you're working with a good wealth manager. And they're very good at mapping that all out, and they'll sit with you and figure out your gifting needs and your family needs and your personal needs and what type of lifestyle you plan to have, and then how much money you can make on your money and work it backwards to give a realistic number. But sometimes even when that team member is there, the business just can't substantiate. Someone wants to retire at the age of 55 and their business is just not big enough or strong enough to support the kind of income that they need for their plans. So, the business doesn't close. So if you're not in one of those three categories, right, if you're not unmotivated, if you're not unwilling to pay for good advisors around you, and you're not trying, have kind of a pie-in-the-sky dream about what you need versus what the business is really worth, then your probability of selling is much higher, 80% or above. I think there's no stats because you can see it's no way to definitively drop different sellers into those buckets. But every business is unique, every transaction is unique. So looking at a industry-wide number like that is not really that useful. Focus on those 3 points instead.
Okay. Well, I think that's all we have the time for as far as questions are concerned.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. And as I said, we've got those 4 PDFs for you to download there before we shut this down. Those are the 4 documents there. The Mark is our semi-monthly magazine. You can learn a little bit more about the M&A industry, about our company, some of our clients. And then the other 3 we prepared specifically for business owners. And a little bit of a pitch here at the end. Promise I held it off to the end. We sell businesses. That's what we do. We do all the different types of transactions that I talked about today. Sam Smoot, who's been here fielding the questions and assisting me with the power surge today, is the traffic cop there. If you can reach out to Sam, we're happy to send someone to meet you at your business location or anywhere else you desire to sit and talk with you about what the M&A markets might hold for you, how we provide our services, and how this whole thing works. Answer your specific questions anytime. Give us about a week or 2 notice to get it scheduled, and we will get an experienced director out there to meet with you. Thank you again for your time, and I hope you'll all join us for the next webinar, in which we will have a power backup or whatever, so we won't have that outage, and I apologize for that. Thank you very much.